Greetings, Rioters. This is Andrew Latinsky, also known as Summoner Fuzzy Luffle, and today's presentation is entitled Improving IP, Improving Incentives. So really briefly, I put together this presentation in order to sort of show you all what it is I think I bring to Riot potentially. Be it my ability to collect data, perform statistics, present them in a reasonable and relatively clean manner, try and find meaning in them, and the way I incorporate design elements into the way I think about gaming today. So to be upfront, I have never done anything like this before. I have never produced a YouTube video. This microphone was basically bought just so I could pull this off because I had an inkling of a plan. And necessity being the mother of all invention, this is what you're getting from me. So, as the title hints at, I want to talk about influence points as a mechanic, as an incentive device, and the ways that influence points have been a problem and solutions I potentially see that can be done with influence points. So really briefly about me. I'm a master's in applied sociology from the University of Central Florida, and I'm working on my doctorate at Florida State right now. I'm a passionate gamer and a researcher as an academic, but in my spare time, I mostly game as my only hobby. I listen to game criticism for fun. I think a lot about these things at this point. My biggest academic data collection has been a data set of 1,600 online dating profiles, which I published a thesis in an academic paper on, looking at the way that body type descriptions were used and varied based upon race, class, gender. At this point, I work with both qualitative and quantitative data, and I think I could bring these skills to Riot. So why Riot, though? Well, besides the fact you all have an awesome game and have commendable amounts of player interaction, the main reason for me and why I've admired you for years at this point is that Riot takes a very proactive approach to gaming. A lot of the mindset is that toxic behavior, bad behavior by players is uncontrollable, that these are the sorts of things that you have to give up on, that certain mechanics cannot be sacrificed no matter what. And that is not the approach Riot Games has taken. Between things such as the Tribunal, the Honor System, massive revamps to very popular champions, Riot has been willing to rethink gaming, rethink the way that a designer interacts with its customers / players. And I think that is really noble. And so I want to lend my skills to this company that has inspired me. So in this presentation, what are you going to expect? So I have two sort of major macro questions. Are newer players being shut out by the upfront demands of the game? In order to answer this, the sort of little inner questions is how much IP can people reasonably earn, and how much do new players need in order to get through the system of the game? In addition, how could the influence point system encourage desirable player behaviors and player happiness that it might not be doing right now? So really briefly to talk about the dataset. This is mostly just me number crunching from between the client or the Wikia for League of Legends. The concepts for improvement are adapted from what I have heard from Rioters are the incentives and the things that they want to see through things such as the forum dev tracker, and my own concepts of what might improve the game. Many of the numbers I'm going to talk about today are going to be rounded off at various points because it just simplifies things, and the difference between a couple hundred IP is not really that significant. If you're curious, though, to have my more specific numbers, I will be attaching my notes, calculations, and data set to the application, and you can feel free to peruse that at your leisure. It's a little bit messy, but I'm pretty sure you can figure it out. So, what is IP's basic issue? From my perspective, there is two sort of major issues to deal with. One, you need a lot of IP to get through this game. You would need almost 400,000 to just get every single champion, not including anything else. To get runes, which you can only get through influence points, the most baseline set that's pretty reasonable is about 17,000. 70,000 is what I got for sort of a middling level one, and I probably have spent over 100,000 IP on runes that I have felt were useful for my characters. In addition, there's not much interaction or encouragement from the IP system. The win of the day is the only common global modifier, and that does encourage people to play once per day, but that's kind of all we're using right now in many ways. So some of you are going to be hearing this and say, haven't we made changes to IP? Haven't we reduced the values over time? Hippolyte did some things, and indeed this is true. A total of 65,100 IP has been reduced since I personally started playing, and about 28,000 of this is from the changes that Riot Hippolyte introduced / outlined in January of last year. However, there are still problems with this system. And just to start with, the system rewards time because of the win of the day bonus being basically the equivalent of playing a second game. But it takes forever if you play this most efficient way. It would take nearly 5 years playing 30 minutes once every day and getting the win bonus, and you would get every champion in the game. This would give you no runes, no rune pages, just champions, which is the bulk, to be fair. So that's one problem, particularly to the upfront costs of new players. In addition, there are few high points in the interactions with influence points. There have been reductions in cost, we've reduced the pain. But what about the positive experiences of gaining more IP? There needs to be high points in the interaction of the system, not just, well, we've made a little less annoying. So, confounding this is that IP costs are all over the map. Only 10% of champions are at the lowest IP cost. Only 20% are at the next highest tier. And 70% fall at every tier above that. But it's worth noting it takes 3 times as much points to get from the lowest tier to the second lowest tier. And to get from the second lowest tier to the middle tier of 3,150 is 2.33 times the 1,350. So you have to do 7 times as much IP to get your initial set of 10 champions, to get every single middle tier champion. That's a lot of difference, a lot of playing. It's not even like you get 1 champion per game, even under the win of the day system. So it's worth keeping in mind that the scaling up is very rapid early, and then most champions are still at the highest tier. In addition, there's a slightly different problem, which is for the longest term and most passionate players, you actually can end up with too much IP, especially if you buy Riot points. My account fuzzy level floats around 40,000 to 55,000 IP currently. There are a few champions I could get, but I have spent over 100,000 in runes. And I'm still floating this much IP, and I have nothing really I feel like putting it in. And I think that's a problem because the most passionate players, the ones who play multiple times a day, are going to be constantly floating this. So how do we deal with these issues? These are a couple of things I would propose to Riot. So number 1, we could start a rotating map of the week with an attached IP bonus similar to a win of the day. The benefit of this is that it encourages people to try new maps and modes, and it gives us a new lever on IP gains so that we don't have to have you play 5 years 1 time a day being sort of the optimal category. So, in addition, Summoner's Rift is by and far the most popular map, and it would encourage the transition to Dominion occasionally, introduce new players to a mode they might not even have thought they liked, because they just never found any reason to play it before this. In addition, we could possibly do a bonus for ranked matches, or a similar weekly sort of bonus for playing a ranked match. And this actually works on 2 dimensions. One of the things I've heard both on the forums and talking with people who play League of Legends around me is there's an anxiety of entering ranked play. There's a lot of feeling that there's going to be too much pressure, too much negative attitude, and this could help encourage people to enter ranked play. For the more experienced players, currently the only thing we have is in form of negative reinforcement, ELO decay, saying you have to play occasionally in ranked, or else we're going to punish you. We could instead add a new form of positive reinforcement saying, hey, you should come play ranked. You'll get more IP. You can get closer to that new champion, which will give you new exciting options in ranked mode. So there's multiple dimensions that these sorts of things can work off of. So I think from sort of the IP spending standpoint, it would behoove us to introduce a new IP tier that's around the 2,000 range, that falls between the 1,300 and the 3,500. This fills in part of the large gap in IP tiers, because a lot of champions fall in the 3,500 rank. And a lot of these champions are simultaneously very old, but probably don't afford the drop all the way down. So this would fill in part of this large gap between these two tiers, and allows a reasonable IP drop for players, which could help mitigate some of that IP issue for new players. In addition, for those people who are floating IP, we need to think about substantive IP sinks for these experienced players. A possible idea I've had is using a mystery gift skin concept for like 10,000 or some other arbitrary large number of IP. By doing this, we give people something they want, which is skins. A lot of people are encouraged by skin and sort of by the gambling element. And they can do something meaningful with their IP if they already have too many. Now, this isn't perfect. Some people actually have all the skins, but it gives us a direction that we might be able to work with. So, in closing for this little research/design presentation, the problems I see with IP: there's too little player interaction with the influence point system, whether it be positive, mostly positive, or negative. In addition, the curve as it exists right now punishes the newest players by having these sort of massive demands for IP up front, and the oldest players and the most passionate by having them constantly floating influence points. In addition, there's all this low-hanging fruit. This is a system in most games where the free currency versus the paid currency is one of the big levers that sort of control the economy of games. And as much as I admire Riot's not massive focus on making money, I think that IP doesn't have to be looked at as just in relation to Riot points. We can also look at it as an incentive structure to reward good behavior or new behavior or things that are good for players. I've even considered the possibility of the honor system being tied to an IP boost, but I think that would have a lot of unintended consequences. So just a brief concept, but not one I would suggest immediately. So what are the solutions I'm a little more confident in? We need to create new sources of IP generation that encourage desirable behaviors. It gives us that positive reinforcement, and it helps deal with the curve. Speaking of dealing with the curve, we need to ease the cost structure of IP. I propose that we add the new tier between one of the largest gaps between tiers so that we have a place to move champions into and less time spent in games in order to get one of the biggest rewards in the game of getting champions. In addition, we need to think of ways to create meaningful uses for IP for people who have everything. There's only so many runes, so many champions, and only so much that people can produce. And we need to find some sinks for these people so they just aren't floating tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of influence points. So I want to close this with a thank you to Riot, and in the spirit of one of your well-known rioters, I'd like to close with a haiku. For mountains of fun, inspiring new ideals, research, and design.